Where's Barry?
So right before that reading that Elaine just gave us, which talks about this cloud of witnesses, the Bible gives a list of people that some people call the Hall of Faith or the Hall of Fame for Faith. And it's a list of people that includes David, who was a great king after he killed Goliath. And people like Noah, who helped save the earth. And it goes on to just say that there are just too many people to name. But to know the Hall of Faith, the people who ran the race and finished the race didn't end at Hebrews 11. It's been going on in all the years since. So today we have a few examples of people, ordinary people, who ended up running a good race and living out lives of faith, and in the process, in some ways, changing the world. So, first one is a man named Martin Luther. And one of the children out there has a picture of Martin Luther. Yeah, could you bring it up here, Annie, and show the whole congregation? You okay? Hey, if you just turn around and hold it way up high. This is the man, Martin Luther. Okay, and you can stay there as long as you want, or you can go back to your grandparents. Okay, so Martin Luther lived in the 1500s. That's a very long time ago. And he was a humble person. He was a monk. So he lived a quiet life of contemplation, and prayer. And he observed a lot, and he thought a lot. And he also studied a lot and taught. So he would petition his superiors in the monastery to go and have more chances to learn at the university. And he would then teach at the university as well. So he spent a lot of academic time, but he spent a lot of time in prayer and in contemplation and in observation. And he noticed some things about the church. And one of them was that the church required a lot of works of what we did to gain our salvation. And one of the things they were doing was actually pretty not so good. The church would let people pay money to get their sins forgiven so they could go to heaven. This was called indulgences. So they could pay money, or they could bring a chicken or some of their crop or whatever to the monastery or to the priest. And all of that would go to the church, but it would be payment for getting rid of their sin. Luther started to think, this seems a little bit shady. So as he thought about it, and then he was studying the Bible at the same time, and he came across this verse in Romans 1:17. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And he came to realize that it is faith that brings us righteousness, faith in Jesus Christ that brings us righteousness. And so he thought, this whole way the church is going about things isn't working. He lived in a place, he lived in Germany, and nearby was a door called the Wittenberg door. And on that door, people would post new ideas about things. They would post important new ways of thinking and they'd go back and forth. So they'd challenge each other on this door, and it's all in writing. So he decided that he would challenge the church on this door. And he wrote 95 theses. He had 95 ways he thought the church needed to change in the way it thought about things. 95, that's a lot, right? So it's almost 100, not quite. And on October 31st, in some year in 1500, he went to the Wittenberg door, and he nailed these 95 theses up. And this, of course, caused a big uproar. The church decided he wasn't good enough. They told part of the church anymore. But he persisted in what he thought God was saying. And we are actually part of the new branch of the church that he formed, what's called the Protestant branch of the church. And he also made the old church think. So not too long after that, they kind of took to heart what they were doing wasn't quite right, and they fixed things. So we had the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. And Reformation Sunday, October 31st, well, this year will be October 30th, is coming up. So this is the time of year when we celebrate the founding of the branch of the church. And Martin Luther, can we hold up Martin Luther again? Was a man of faith who put his faith into practice and changed the world. Or God used him to change the world, but he had been an ordinary man. Okay, a couple of hundred years later, there was a man in England named William Carey, and one of the children out there has a picture of William Carey. All right, can you hold William Carey above your head so the whole congregation can see? And William Carey was also an ordinary man. He was a cobbler working in his father-in-law's cobbler shop. Eventually, he took it over when his father-in-law died. He had a wife, children, but he was just an ordinary man. But while he was, you can either stay there or down, it's up to you. While he was working in this cobbler shop and making shoes and fixing shoes and serving the community that way, he was studying. So he spent a lot of his time reading about theology and God and the Bible and missions and all of these things, okay? And he knew that for hundreds and hundreds of years, there had been a lot of people who had preached the gospel in different places. But things had kind of slacked off. They had gotten stagnant, especially if you thought about England. So he came across the verse, or began contemplating seriously on the verse. How then can they call on him they have not believed in? And how can they believe without hearing about him? And how can they hear without a preacher? And how can they preach unless they are sent? And he knew that there were people who needed to hear about Jesus, and that there needed to be more people sent to tell people about Jesus, to preach about Jesus. Otherwise, these people wouldn't know about Jesus. And he began to realize that there were places on earth where there just wasn't anyone to preach Jesus because they didn't know him. And he thought the church should be more active in sending people to help others know. So he wrote a book, and it had a big long fancy name, but it was an inquiry into how Christians should respond. We won't go there. But it had a lot of influence within the church. And the church began thinking about missions more. Eventually, they sent William Carey and his family, or part of his family, to India. He went to Calcutta first, ended up in Serampore because the non-Baptist, he was a Baptist, the non-Baptist missionaries in Calcutta didn't like it, there was Baptist, so they didn't let him in. So he went to Serampore and founded a Baptist mission there. And eventually his son went to Burma and interacted with the Jensens. You can ask me about the Jensens later. But his mission became a model for how missions was done, and it was really a catalyst for people going to other places where Jesus was not known, and leading the way in teaching about Jesus, and also in helping where there were real physical and practical needs. So William Carey was a man who ran the race, who paid attention to what God was calling him to do, and went ahead and changed the world. Can we see William Carey one more time? Can you hold him up? Hey, okay. Then if we jump forward a couple of hundred years, we come to the middle of the 20th century, actually, and to a little girl, a very little girl. She was 6 at the time, And we can see this picture of Ruby Bridges. Turn around, hold up Ruby Bridges, and Norm, how old are you? 6. You're the same age as Ruby Bridges was. And I'll tell you, Ruby Bridges is still alive. She's actually younger than some of the people in this room. This wasn't all that long ago. Okay, you can just stay here or sit down, whatever you want. But when Ruby Bridges was 6, she was one of 6 children, 6 Black children who was given the opportunity to attend a white school. So in the South, this was in Alabama, the Black schools and the white schools were separated, and the Black schools did not have anywhere near the resources that the white schools had. So, some people thought, this is crazy. Ruby Bridges' parents among them. So Ruby was sent to school at a white school. She was the only one of the 6 kids given permission to actually attend. And the thing is that most of the parents of the white children boycotted the school. So they didn't send their children to school. The first day, Ruby was the only child of the school. And she had to walk behind National Guardsmen, and they said, just keep her eyes on us. And she had to walk this gauntlet of people screaming and saying how horrible she was, and yet yelling abuse at her. I'm 6 years old. I'm 6 years old. Okay. So the second day, the local Baptist pastor sent his kids to school. He had to walk the same gamut. He's like, I just want to educate my kids, okay? So more and more parents sent their kids to the school, but none of the first graders' parents did. So Ruby was alone in her classroom the entire year with the one teacher willing to teach her. There was a man, Robert Coles, who was observing Ruby. He was a child psychologist, and he studied children in stressful situations. He also gave Ruby clothes so that she would fit in, like better clothes so that she would fit in. He did a lot for her, but he and the teacher assigned to her would notice that she was moving her lips as she walked that gauntlet of people screaming abuse. So they asked her, who are you talking to? And she said, well, I'm praying for the people that are yelling at me. Don't you think they need prayer? So it says I took them aback, but this is what she had learned in Sunday school and in church and at home, that you pray for the people who are mean to you. When she was 30, she looked back on that in an interview and she said, well, when I was 6, I really had no idea what I was doing. I just did what my parents and my teachers had taught me to do. So teachers and parents, keep that in mind. What we teach our children is important. But she said, at 30, now I get it. I get that I was supposed to be forgiving, and I get that that was hard. But it's something that's important to do. So she came to realize that she had done automatically something that was, that she now had an understanding of. And she continued to forgive the people who had screamed abuse at her. She is currently the head. She actually grew up to become a telephone operator, but she became involved in activism, and she is currently involved in a nonprofit that works on race reconciliation. And she continues to be a faithful Baptist and Christian and follower of Christ. So she is somebody who is running that race. And of course, we could go on all day too, right? We could talk about the Judson and Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and Augustine and millions of others, and millions of people whose names will never be known, who lived out the faith, who ran that race and who have the crown or headed for the crown. So I would just encourage you to be among those people, to look and see, again, Ruby Bridges was only 6. William Carey was a cobbler. Martin Luther was a humble monk. These were not people who were born to greatness or who were handed things. So we all have the ability to make a difference. as we live out a life of faith in Christ. And I would encourage you to pay attention to those opportunities and to do that. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you, Melinda and Seth, for those good words, good reminders that we may not feel adequate to what God calls us to, but God is always adequate on our behalf. So at this time, we're going to continue our worship through our